interests align. Some of them do. We have always had an interest in preserving the existence of the Israeli state. But in the past, when we thought the Israelis went too far, presidents have intervened. Nixon intervened in 73. Carter intervened later on. Reagan intervened and said, enough's enough. But we've also been very careful not to commit troops ashore. And this is what worries me. We have 1,000 soldiers in Syria, probably have almost that many in Iraq. Now they're talking about several thousand in Jordan and potentially these 2,000 special ops. What does this mean when they go ashore? Well, what it means is that they're vulnerable, that they can become targets. I mean, as soon as Americans show up in any real strength, everybody wants to kill them. Why? Because if they can kill them, they figure they can break down the consensus at home and we'll leave. Well, they're not wrong. We lost 38,000 in Korea, 58,000 dead in Vietnam, over 100,000 wounded. Eventually it catches up. So they're not wrong on that. But the problem is when you put troops ashore, you end up as you did in Lebanon back in 1982. Some of your viewers may remember when Reagan finally acceded to the wishes of Secretary of State George Shultz and said, yeah, I'll put a battalion of Marines ashore, reinforced to about 1,000 Marines. And then we'll have Marines in this hospital stationed nearby. We have to have a hospital ashore to deal with casualties. You remember what happened? A bombing, over 380 people are killed. And immediately Reagan called Weinberger, who was the Secretary of Defense, and he looked at him and he said, you said don't send our troops in there. You were right. I was wrong. I listened to George Shultz. I shouldn't have. He said, so get them out now. He cut his losses and got out. And since then, we've been pretty careful about not pushing too many troops into the way of people that we know want to kill them. Well, we're casting that aside and we're going ashore. So we'll see what happens. But 2 battle groups offshore aren't going to change much ashore. I think the idea was, well, we can reinforce the Israeli Air Force and bomb Hamas, or not Hamas, but Hezbollah. Yep. Well, the problem there is we don't know what everybody else who's part of this catastrophe is willing to do.
So that's where I was going to go next. So this is what is difficult for me to understand. Obviously, we have a conflict right now between Israel and Hamas. There's other actors there that were willing to get involved, maybe Iran, maybe Turkey, other places. We all want peace, obviously, but we're on the precipice of a big problem, in my opinion. What happens? How do we fix that? How do we make sure we don't get to that point where Iran's getting involved? Maybe Russia's getting involved. There's all these different actors. How do we make sure we don't get there, Colonel?
Well, I think we should consider running you for president or at least Secretary of State because you're asking the right questions. And I'm unconvinced that these questions are being asked. And I'm also afraid of some bad assumptions. The Iranians right now seem to think that it's inevitable that we will attack them. They seem to be engaged in preparing themselves for it. The Turks are looking at what's happening, and I think Mr. Erdogan has decided it's pretty clear the Israelis are going to go into Gaza. And so he's quietly told Turkish forces to get ready. He's also got Turkish naval forces not that far from ours in the Mediterranean. They are going to be joined by Russian naval forces. I think the Russians have planned to send a hospital ship. The idea being that they could anchor offshore from Gaza and open up a humanitarian corridor across the beach. These things all suggest that other than Israel, we have no support in the Middle East for whatever we want to do. No one is interested in what we want to do or what we are proposing. What they want to do is stop the invasion of Gaza. Well, the Israelis haven't gone in yet. And I attribute some of that to their concerns about the state of training for the IDF, especially with hundreds of thousands of reservists who aren't very well trained and haven't had much time to prepare. That may be part of it. I don't know what else is on their minds. But if they go into Gaza, then I think all bets are off. And that's why, personally, I was hoping that Biden would go there and then come out and announce that we found a different way forward. We're not going to introduce thousands of Israeli troops into Gaza. But we haven't heard that. And so I have to plan for the worst. And I think that's the attitude for everybody else in the region. The worst thing that can happen is they go into Gaza and kill more Arabs, not necessarily Hamas. Some will be Hamas, but large numbers of Arabs who just happen to be there. That's unacceptable. And that will bring the rest of the region down on Israel.
Before we move on to our last topic today, let me just ask this question. Has America lost respect across the globe? Is America not the same as maybe it was 20, 30 years ago? And when, America got involved, things sometimes got handled, Colonel. Right now, it seems like America gets involved and craziness ensues. Have we lost respect across the globe?
Yes, it's more than respect. I don't think people trust us, and we are widely viewed now as an enemy. Whereas if you go back 30 years ago, go back to 1990, it was a very different attitude. People respected us even when they didn't agree with us, and they tended to trust that we would keep our word. You'll remember that in 1991, after this conflict ended, we withdrew our forces, which we said we would do. And we tried from that point forward, at least until 1994, not to meddle anymore in the region. It's our meddling repeatedly over and over and over again to install a new government that will do whatever we tell them to do, frankly, that has gotten us into trouble. So I think right now, nobody believes us. And you got to understand, they're looking at what's happened in Ukraine. We've spent, somewhere around 80 billion at this point. I don't know. I mean, I've listened to different calculations, but virtually everything we've sent over there has been destroyed by the Russians. And this great Ukrainian army that we exalted as the answer to our needs has been utterly and completely destroyed. The Ukrainian state is destroyed. The place is falling apart. So if you're sitting in the Middle East and you see that, many people are saying, well, listen, I don't think the Americans really know what they're doing. And they don't seem to have done very well. So again, to go back to your original point, I don't think they really do respect us anymore. Saudi Arabia is very important to us and has been for decades. And MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, met Blinken. But before he met him, he made Blinken sit for 24 hours. He simply wouldn't speak to him. And when Blinken showed up, it was largely a one-way conversation. And that was also true, I think, in Egypt. I think Sisi, for him, it was a one-way conversation. Again, we're seen as a danger because we could actually destabilize everything. They really don't want to do that. But if we're insistent on pressing ahead, well, then I think the attitude is we might as well go in there and try to finish this problem off, which I think is a catastrophe for Israel and for us.
And President Biden had other meetings scheduled this week that have been canceled. So to that point,
the King of Jordan, who's always been a good friend to us, won't even speak to us because he knows that his country is at high risk of falling apart. He's got more Palestinians in this country